Okay, so looking at the LCD screen, we're going to go ahead and we will press directly in the middle here. And that's where we'll have our 4 arrows inside the box. We will press the check mark, and now the camera is choosing the exposure value based on the entire hemisphere of the lens on the other side of the camera. Okay, so I've done several videos so far talking about the GoPro Max, trying to decide what are the best settings for the GoPro Max, and quite honestly, it's kind of a toss-up and it really depends on your preferences. For me, I think the safest way to really do the best adjustments on the GoPro Max is in your EV and with also the exposure value balancing. With the EV, I find that like on a bright day like this, currently right now I have an EV of -1, and I think it does a really good job of kind of bringing down the highlights and not blowing them out too much, but you still get all of this beautiful color and picture quality out of the Max. I've actually used the high sharpness here. I think when you're moving around, if there's a lot of detail, like a lot of foliage or leaves or just repeating patterns, those are times when I really suggest using something like medium, because it tends to not make them as sharp, and it just kind of gives you some weird noise in the image when you have that. When I was like down by the sand near the ocean, I also think the medium looks a little bit better. Low I wouldn't use unless you're going to be doing a lot of editing in your editor. Low does kind of help out a little bit in being able to play around with your contrast, but for the most part I think it's safe to just say sharp or on medium and you're going to get a good picture. As far as the color, I think actually the GoPro color looks best, and it does a really good job. I did actually play around with the flat color and the native white balance using the GoPro app to adjust the colors, and what I found was it was actually a lot easier and I got a much better result than when I was fooling around with it in DaVinci. Now that's mainly because I'm not a colorist. I'm not a great editor when it comes to getting into that color grading by a long shot, and some people are, and they would probably want to use that setting all the time, but I find that it's just way too much work. It's more work than I'm looking for. I have a GoPro Fusion. I love that camera, but the reason I don't use it very much is because it's a lot of work. And the reason I love this camera, the GoPro Max, is because it's not a lot of work. And so I think the best suggestion is let's keep it as simple as possible. So when it comes to best setting, try to keep your ISO low, but the GoPro Max does a really good job. I would say anything above 1600 is where it's going to start to really fall apart. Now that's unlike other GoPros where I would say at 800 or above 800 it starts to fall apart. The GoPro Max does a better job at 1600 ISO and lower. However, you should always try to keep it as low as you can. So if you can put the ISO at 100 max, put it at 100 max. If you're going to be having a lot of shifting light, and I'm kind of getting that right now even with these clouds, and I have my max ISO set to 100, and I probably should have set it to something closer to 200, but since we're doing a static shot, I'm not that worried about the shutter, and I don't mind if the shutter is going to slow down to make the adjustment. But then that brings me to the next point. So when I did my low light testing and the GoPro Max, I feel really bad because it's like a 20-some minute video, and I started off with just the standard settings, and then I kind of worked through some of the worst settings on that on the camera, and then it's only about in the middle that I actually hit a couple of really good settings. And the video, I didn't know what was going to be good, what wasn't going to be good, and unfortunately those video clips are really short, and then you move through again all the settings that just don't work out very well, and it kind of gave the impression that the Max isn't good at low light. Now I don't think that any GoPro is good at night, but as far as in low light, the Max actually does a really good job. Now, in a static shot, it does a fantastic job, but when you're doing movement, that's when the blur starts coming in with the stabilization. Now, you can combat that. Now, you can combat it in one of two ways, almost three, but really what we found in that video was, number one, you need a fast shutter. Now, the shutter at 1/120 was passable. It was good, but you're still going to get some motion blur. 1/240 was perfect. There was absolutely no blur. It looked really good, but it was considerably darker. And then 1/480, it actually looked very clear and sharp, but it was too dark to really be able to use. So how do you get to those settings, and then what ISO should you be doing? So what I would suggest, and I'm gonna still test this, I haven't done it yet, but I would first set my shutter to 1/480. Then you're going to move your max or your min ISO up until it gets to the point where you finally have a decent amount of brightness. Now what you're going to do is remember that number on that ISO. So let's say that ISO pulls up at 1600. Then you're going to drop your shutter speed down to 1/120. And then we're going to move our ISO up again until we can get to a decent setting. So maybe in this case it's 800. So then what you're going to do is use those two numbers as your ISOs, min and max. So your max will be 1600, your min would be 800 in that case, and then you can go ahead and put that shutter at 1/240. And having it right in the between there allows that camera to make adjustments with those ISOs, and it pretty much guarantees that you're going to get a good shot, and it's gonna look good, and you won't have too much motion blur. Now, of course, you could just set the shutter of 1/240 and try to find the right min and max on the ISO, but I always find that it works better to kind of have a little bit of leeway. So having where we did a little test of the 1/120 and finding the suitable ISO, that allows the camera that flexibility. And yes, it might open you up to a little bit of blur every now and then, but for the most part, you're gonna have a lot of very good usable footage. Now, the other thing we found though, which is much simpler than all of that, is just the EV. Drop the EV all the way down to -2, it forces the faster shutter. But you will want to make sure that you're using a high ISO. So set your max to 1600, set your min if it's in a low light situation where you know you can never use 100 or 200, maybe set the min to 400, and then you're going to be able to get a really good image, and you most likely won't get a lot of blur. So that's my suggestion there. So finally, then on this day-to-day usage, we kind of talked about that already. I like just pretty much the max, the default settings, but you want to play with that EV, or you want to use your exposure value balancing. So for example, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to stop this, and I'm actually going to choose the brightest spot in the sky, and then I'm going to use that as my exposure value, and that overrides all the other settings such as your ISO and your shutter speed, but we'll see how that looks. Okay, so one of the things that we're going to talk about is exposure value selecting. I'm going to turn on my GoPro Max, and hopefully this is on my head right and you're seeing this correctly. And so anyway, in this we get our LCD screen, and then if we just press on the LCD and push and hold, we get a little box here. Now right now, with that box with the 4 arrows pointing to all 4 corners, we are picking a hemisphere exposure. So this means that it is going to be using the lens on the opposite side of the camera to choose that exposure, that lens. I'm going to start a recording, and now I'm going to turn and face and look up towards the sun, and we're going to bring it back down again. Now I'm going to stop that recording. Then what we can also do is we can press on that center LCD screen, and we can move it around and choose different spots on that screen to have the camera pick those spots as the exposure value areas. And if I like what I got, so let's say I choose up here into the brighter area, which is what I would generally suggest you do, then I go ahead and I hit that check mark. So now what I've done is I have locked the exposure value dead center onto the sun up in the sky, and then I locked it, brought it back down the camera to where I wanted it. And so how does this look? And we can do our 360 view all around and see how the exposure looks, and if this might be the right setting. Now the other option, like I said in a vlogging scenario, would be to exposure value right here onto my chest and see how that looks. So we'll do that real quick. Okay, so now the exposure value is right here on my chest, and I find that that does a really good job. It makes sure that my exposure is always right. And then also it tends to not overdo it, either too aggressive on bringing down the highlights or too aggressive in bringing up the shadows. So I think that if you're going to be doing any type of vlogging with your 360 camera, or a lot of view where you're looking back at yourself, this is a really good way to do it. I didn't lock the value. What I did was I just am using that little box right there. In fact, I kind of noticed that as the sun reflects off my hands, maybe off of even this white shirt, it looks like it does a little adjusting, and then off my blue shirt it's a little different. So you can see it kind of adjusting. I don't know if you can see that, but I can see it in the LCD, even though it's very minor. So we pretty much have covered 360 with the GoPro Max and settings. If you have any questions or comments, please be sure to leave them down below. Also, I need subscribers. I'm really trying to get to 1,000. I'm about 800 away, but I want to be able to use the features and the functions like the live streaming, and also being able to test that out, not only with these cameras today, but also I'm sure there'll be cameras in the future, and I don't think YouTube is removing that limitation anytime soon. So if you could help me out with that, I'd really appreciate it. If you dislike this video, that's fine. Please give it a thumbs down, but also leave a comment down below, because I can only make these videos better if I know what I can do to change to make them better for you. I am going to be working on making them a lot shorter. I know this one's kind of running long as well, but I'm trying to be as comprehensive as I can with them. If you have questions about settings, I have a ton of videos that I've already done so far, so be sure to check those out, and you can kind of make your decision as far as what you think looks best, and then you can use that to help you test them out, or to figure out what might be the best setting for you in each given situation. So I hope that's helped you out. Now there's only one last question that we really, the burning question that actually kind of bugs me sometimes, and I'm like, what should I do? And that is hero mode or 360 mode. Now I've actually fallen in love with this 360 mode. I love the fact that I can be recording and something can be going on over there, and I can move the lens afterwards and I can see what was happening over there. I mean, there's actually been times when I'm recording and I'm looking at something and I want to stay focused on that, and I hear something going on behind me, and I don't even turn around, I don't even have to look, because I know that the camera is capturing it. And it's a really cool thing, especially when you can go home and go, oh, so that's what was going on. Now of course, if it's a large boom or something like that, maybe you want to check it out. But anyway, so I'm going to do just a couple of real quick shots using hero mode, and then we can compare them to 360 mode and say which one's better. Now when we get into hero mode, we run into all kinds of things. You have the options of 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second, and then you got your ISOs, your EV, your shutters, your white balancing. Oh, forgot about that. This one is on an auto white balance, and typically I actually would recommend, if you can, choosing your own white balance. I do find that that works out best. However, GoPro generally does get that very good. But if we're just talking about the best settings, I would say choose your own white balance. Sharpness we talked about, but we're going to talk a little bit about sharpness when we move to hero mode, and we're going to do that right now. Okay, so right now we are in hero mode. Now I generally, when I'm in hero mode, I use 1440p, not the 1080p, and that's because I like to be able to reframe. When you use 1440, the width is the same as a 1080p, but the height is greater, and so you're able to adjust up and down to your video even if you're using it in a 1080p timeline. Now currently right now we're in GoPro color. We have ISO min and max of 100. The white balance is on auto. Everything else is standard. The other thing that I failed to mention before, which of course I think is pretty self-explanatory, always use high bit rate on all of these, and you're going to get the best image that way. Now when it comes to sharpness, so here's my thought. Right now I'm in linear. When using narrow and when using linear, always use sharp. I feel that the softness is just too much when you're in narrow and linear, and I find that the high sharpness works best. But when you move into wide and into super view, then I think the medium looks best. And if you're going to do any of your own color grading and editing, then I think that you should use low. If you're going to be doing that much editing, low generally seems to work best in all of the modes. But in general, just for going out recording, having fun, so high, and then medium, and I think that looks best. So that's my personal opinion. So now the question is, how does this look compared to the 360 mode? I actually was blown away the very first time I saw in the hero mode, and I put it up against my Hero 8, my Hero 7, and my Hero 6, even in 4K, and quite honestly I think that the image is fantastic and I really like it. You can't zoom in as much and get that much detail, but as far as overall image, you're not really missing out on a whole lot by using 1440 or 1080p on the GoPro Max. Okay, and just to keep it even, I have the exposure balance now right here on my chest, and this is going to be the end of this video. So this is the GoPro Max in hero mode, and one of the amazing things about the hero mode with the GoPro Max is the stabilization. It truly is unbreakable. It is the best in the business. I've never seen anything like it on any camera. I mean, where else can you literally take a camera and flip it upside down and the viewer can't even tell, because the image is just so solid? It's a pretty amazing thing. So when to use 360, when to use the hero mode? In general, I think the hero mode works great when you just need to record like a camera. So if you are, like, for example, if you're biking and you want the front view, or you're walking and you have a specific subject that you want to record in front of you, use hero mode. If you want to record just yourself and it's just a dialogue like this, I would recommend using the hero mode instead of using the 360 mode. Not only are you able to get what I think is just a better overall image, but you're also able to prioritize the mics. Like right now, currently I have wind reduction on, but I have the mic facing me prioritized, so that way I'll get the best volume out of it. And we'll also be able to compare that to the 360 footage I just did earlier, and then you can tell me what you think looks best. So in those cases, I would say hero mode. You're filming your kids, hero mode is great, watching them run around. However, if you want to be able to set the camera down and you get involved and play with your kids, then that's a fantastic thing. Throw it in 360 mode. You never know what's going to happen, where it's going to happen, and that's the beauty of these cameras. And that's kind of your clue. If you want to be able to capture everything and you're not always sure where the action's going to be in 360. If you know exactly what you want to record, I would say go into the hero mode and you'll get the best quality. So anyway, there you go. I'm Dan, and thanks for watching. And once again, please subscribe and leave a like or dislike. But more importantly, leave a comment letting me know how I can make these videos better for you. Take care.